So should we just jump in? Rigel, we ready to go?
Yeah, go
All
for
right.
it.
So we've got an hour and 15 minutes together. We're going to make this as interactive as possible. I consider this a relatively small size group, so I think this is manageable. Less than 50 people on Zoom. I can see all your faces on one screen on my big monitor, and I'm looking forward to doing a couple things. Number one, I'm going to provide you a little bit of background up front on the Stagen Leadership Academy, which we founded 25 years ago this year. And then I'm going to share with you a piece of content that we call the Pursuit of Higher Ground. That is our most recent expression of how to translate developmental theory, integral theory, spiral dynamics, and complexity theory, for all intents and purposes, how to translate that into the listening of a broad audience from traditionalists to progressives. So this content can be delivered in as short as an 18-minute keynote speech in front of 1,000 people. I do this in large groups all the time, and the feedback that I have gotten in the last 2 years I'm still in the experimental phase with this material is incredibly positive across the board. And so rather than just share the content and treat you like a normal audience, I'm going to treat you as you are, your fellow travelers. We're all students of integral theory, developmental theory, and I see this more as a peer group than anything else. So I'll present the material. I just have a handful of slides, and that'll be a little didactic, little presentation mode. And then we'll come out of that, and instead of waiting until the end of the call for Q&A, we'll actually start with the Q&A right after I clear the slides, so that I can use your questions to continue sharing and presenting. I am not an academic. I am not a theorist. We've got the big brains on this call. Salzman is here and others, and we're practitioners. As Steve knows, Bert Parley, who was with Ken Wilber, who I met through Ken Wilber almost 22 years ago. We are in the arena working with leaders on a daily basis that are running organizations. We primarily work with privately held businesses and executives within those enterprises, and our sweet spot is the mid-market. And for people, what does that mean? That means companies with a couple hundred employees to a couple thousand employees, that sort of range. The reason that we don't work by design with large public companies is we will only work with an organization if the CEO of that organization is engaged in their own deep inner work. If they're not willing to actually look at themselves and work on themselves, we will not go into the organization to work with their people. So yes, we do work with some public companies. Many years of working with Whole Foods and working with John Mackey and his top 300 leaders were their partner for the sort of executive development there. But that is one of the few big known companies we work with, because John is someone who's willing to walk the talk and actually work on himself. But that unfortunately is really rare with CEOs of typically large Fortune 1000 businesses. So that's a little context on who we are, what we're about. As Ken referred to us, had to have been almost maybe 17 or 18 years ago, the little experiment in Dallas, like what's going on in Dallas. And people will often say, Rand, you guys work with, we have a physical brick and mortar facility, a leadership academy in Dallas. We have our team. Bert and I just came out of our annual team retreat. We had 72, not the whole team, but 72 attendees there, just to give you a sense of our size, our faculty. And as Rigel said, we work with several thousand leaders each year across the country that either come to Dallas or we go to their organizations. And people will say, why are you in Dallas? Like, it makes no sense. You're working with Wilbur, you're working with Bob Keegan, you're working with Bill Torbert, Suzanne Cook-Reuter, cutting edge integral theory. Like, what are you doing in Dallas, Texas? And the answer is, this is where the work is, right? This is where the work is. This is where the need is. So we are in the heartland. We work extensively in Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. We work in Oklahoma, Louisiana. We work really deeply in Kansas. We work in Ohio, in Illinois. We go down into Georgia. We really are in sort of the middle of the country and a little bit down into the southeast. We are not heavily penetrated by design on the coast. Yes, we have clients in Seattle and New York and in California, but the mass focus for us has been Heartland. And I'll explain that after I clear the slides. So that's background, context, a segmentation, where we focus. And we're not in the entertainment business. So we don't do any event-based training. Our shortest program for a new client is a 52-week practice-based, integrally informed program where they come to Dallas 1 day per quarter in a cohort of 20 leaders from anywhere in the country. And we will only work with a client if the CEO goes first. So now let's get to the juicy part, get to the content. So I have been, along with my team, trying to figure out how to crack the code on a skillful means, on a translation of spiral dynamics. We started teaching our leaders, our clients, the spiral. And we basically did it as a developmental progression, as it is laid out by Don Beck and by Claire Graves's research. And what would happen is the worldviews, the traditional worldview, lower down, was very threatened by the hierarchical nature of the model. The achievers, the strive, drive, kind of orange worldview, would look to figure out how they could sort of game and climb the ladder. So there was they just wanted us to click the slides faster so they could kind of move through their progression. The pluralists, the progressives, were incredibly offended by the hierarchical nature of what we were laying out. So after about 5 or 6 years, we moved from a vertical rendering and we presented picking 4 of the colors: red, blue, orange, and green. And for those that don't know spiral dynamics, this sort of power mindset or power worldview, red, the more traditional worldview, blue, the more achiever worldview, orange, and the more progressive pluralistic worldview, green. And we basically laid them out, as we're still doing today in our curriculum, as a little bit more of a horizontal, and saying that there's not one that's better than the other, because in reality, one isn't better than the other. They all are appropriate in the appropriate context. And so what's the context is what's best. And so that has been, for some people in the integral community, that was blasphemy. Like, how could you do that? How could you make this appear to be almost a type system? And the answer is, we're meeting people where they are. We're not demanding that they meet us where we are, because we're up in the ivory tower from their perspective. And so it's been an incredibly powerful and potent strategy, communication strategy, because it works and it's getting people into the game of understanding the nuances of development. And then in 2021, with Steve as really a guide to me, he introduced in an article this idea. It was just a sentence, right, Steve? It was just a simple sentence saying, I'm no longer believing that common ground is going to be the fullness of what we need. We need higher ground. We need more than just common ground. And I grabbed on that term and said, there's something really magical about this idea of higher ground, and ultimately was able to build a new expression, which I'm about to share with you, in the form of what is now a keynote presentation. I'm going to send Rigel the slides. It's just it's a small emailable PowerPoint file. So if you want to send it out to everybody in the spirit of abundance, everyone could have these slides. Okay, and so the move here was, how can we actually put red to the side and really focus on the traditional, the achiever, and the pluralist, that sort of blue, orange and green worldviews, and bring in yellow in what I hope you will see as a very creative way of inviting people into a more of an integrated orientation. The title of this content is The Pursuit of Higher Ground. And the word pursuit is incredibly precise because we don't want anyone to suggest, like to suggest themselves or to infer that we, an integral community, are up at higher ground and we're putting our hand down to help others come up to us. That would be unskillful and presumptive, and it could come across as arrogant. And so the frame here is we are all in a place where we together can pursue higher ground, where we can all look at this slide in the pursuit of something, in a dynamic journey towards something aspirational and something higher. And then this image here, as many of you know from Steve's book of Developmental Politics, how America can grow into a better version of itself. Right now, the version so many of us are experiencing is hyperpolarization, is this culture war, is this time in which people are experiencing incredible confusion and conflict and emotion. And if we talk to the average American and ask them what's going on, they're likely going to say things like, well, we have issues with racial issues in America. We have issues with climate in America, in which there are climate deniers and people who are not sensitive to what's going on. We have huge income inequality. We have all these issues. Okay, so pick them: race, climate, income inequality. And what we would say from a developmental standpoint is that those are actually not the real issue. Those are the symptoms of the real issue. So if we were to go upstream of the polarization, we would assert that there's actually a conflict of worldviews that's showing up with those symptoms. And so the idea is to introduce that if we were walking down a street in a major city, we would be interpreting what was going on in the world. We would be relating with the world through the lens that we're wearing, through our worldviews. And we invite, in this case, an audience to recognize that in many ways, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, which is a concept I think many of you are familiar with. We don't see the world as it is objectively. We are always filtering and we're always interpreting through the lens at which we're making meaning of the world, and thus the idea of a worldview. And so then we go in and say, and I'm bringing you guys behind the curtain a little bit. I don't normally, pause and offer up these nuances here, but please pay attention to the placement of where these colors are on the screen. So we start with introducing the idea that there are three dominant worldviews in America today, and we introduce this idea of an achiever worldview. And we talk about how this would be your capitalist crowd, your business people. And with the achievers, from this worldview, there are a lot of healthy contributions that achievers have made and continue to make to America and to the world. And we talk about that as the light of the achiever worldview. Things like modern medicine and things like economic development. And yet, even though there are all these wonderful expressions and contributions from the achiever worldview, where there is light, there is also shadow. There is pathology. There are these very destructive forces that come from the achiever worldview. Things like greed and self-dealing and cronyism and regulatory capture, environmental destruction. And so it's this capacity to be able to recognize the light and the shadow, to be able to say, look at how long we are living relative to just 100 years ago, thanks to modern medicine. Look at this incredible economic development that has allowed so much of humanity to flourish and coming out of poverty at a continued increasing rate. And yet there are these shadows within the Achiever worldview. And then we introduce, notice it's on the right here, I don't normally say that, we introduce the traditional worldview. And we say those who are operating with a traditional worldview also have light and contributions. And the traditional worldview brings us family values, brings us law and order, brings us structure, brings us so many elements of our society that keep order. And yet there is a shadow of traditionalism. And traditionalist shadows can include things like bigotry or homophobia or racism, not at a systemic level, but at an individual level, like actual racism. There is a shadow here, and things like anti-science, not believing in science, which is in conflict with the Achiever worldview, which brings us science. And then lastly, we introduced this idea of the progressive worldview. And the progressive worldview has incredible contributions, a multicultural orientation, a recognition of previously marginalized communities, a ability to be incredibly sensitive to the earth and to the natural system and to the environment. And yet, where there is light, there is shadow. And in the shadow of progressivism, we see things like corrosive identity politics, and we also see cancel culture, and we see a form of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, a form of inclusion that says you are included as long as you see the world through a progressive lens. And so when I talk to my progressive friends and I talk about what's going on with diversity, equity, and inclusion in America, they say we need to heal America, if you remember the prior slide. And I say, well, where are the people who voted for Donald Trump? And they're like, well, they're not welcome at this conversation, at this table, because they voted for Donald Trump. And there's such a contradiction there that we stand for inclusion, but there are conditions with that form of inclusion. And I want you all to know that I am terrified by the shadow of all three of these worldviews. The dark underbelly of all three are horrific in their most extreme expression. And I adore the healthy expression of all three. And so when people say, well, Rand, which one's better? The answer is it depends, right? It depends. And so now what happens in America, what is happening, and we all know this because we're living it every day, is we're seeing how the parts of our country that are struggling to make sense of what's happening, what they start to do is they start to look for a way to manage their own anxiety. And they start to look to see, which of these camps, which of these worldviews most resonate with me. And we call this the easy button. And they punch the easy button and subordinate themselves to the narrative that most resonates with them. And to make things a little simpler, because we don't have a large amount of time tonight, I'm gonna just go to the traditionalist on the right and the progressives on the left and say, okay, if I'm on the traditionalist on the right, it's Fox, and that's my news channel, and that's my echo chamber that I'm going to join, and I'm going to read magazines, and I'm going to read social media, and I'm going to subscribe to that channel, that camp. But if I'm on the progressive side, I'm on MSNBC, I'm on CNN, I'm on The View. I'm going to actually start to subscribe to those parts of the worldview echo chambers that most resonate with me. And the problem, and we all know this, is when we actually are in a traditionalist camp criticizing the progressives, what the traditionalist media is doing is they're amplifying the shadow of the progressives. And then what the progressive camps are doing in their expressions of media and the monetization that comes from all of this with outrage is that the progressives are amplifying, when they criticize the traditionalist, the shadows of the traditionalist. So what's happening is the worst of the other is being amplified and put forth as the other. And I want to say this again. The worst of the other is being put forth as the totality of the other, which actually leads Americans to believe that we are more divided than we actually are. I genuinely believe that we are being told that we're divided at a level that's not, at least my direct experience on the ground, navigating all three of these camps on a regular basis. And so, what do we do? What is the path forward? And so, I want, for those of you who know the idea of the dialectic, I want to introduce that here because it's very useful. It's also very accessible. So the dialectic would say that there's a thesis and there's an antithesis to that thesis. So thesis and antithesis. And then from the thesis and antithesis, we actually have a synthesis that emerges above that, a higher order synthesis. And so when we take the traditionalists with part of the achiever on the right, and let's hold them out as the thesis of American exceptionalism. And these are people, and Steve really gave me this particular language, these are people who want to protect what's right with America. And then on the left, the progressives, and sort of part of the achiever group also, that is a group that wants to actually fix what's wrong with America. And so we have this incredible conflict between those who want to protect what's right and those who want to fix what's wrong with America, and they're banging into each other like tectonic plates. And when we ask ourselves which one of these groups is, quote, right, the answer is they're both partially right. And when I'm with an audience, I will literally say, if you feel like there are things that we need to protect about America, raise your hand. And in almost every room, all the hands go up. And then I say, if you think that there are things that we need to fix, things that are wrong with America, raise your hand. Almost all the hands go up. It's not half and half. Almost everyone can relate with both of these orientations. And so then what we say is, if we want to move to a higher order synthesis, we are not going to get there simply by finding common ground. We need common ground. We need compromise, which we're not seeing much of these days in our politicians. So I don't want to marginalize common ground, but as Wilbur would say, common ground is necessary, but not sufficient. It's not going to get us where we need to go. So I want you guys to imagine that we find a common ground among these three worldviews, and we were able to use that common ground as a solid ground from which to move upwards so that we can actually move to what we really need, which is a higher ground synthesis and integration. And so here we go to finish out the slides, and then we can get into Q&A. So higher ground. And now we're going to say at higher ground, we're going to do everything we can to actually leave behind the shadows. We're not going to be able to leave all of it behind, but we're going to try to limit the shadows of all three and then take the unique contributions, the light of all three, and move those into an integrated and synthesized orientation. And notice, once again, I don't normally say this, bringing the light of the three worldviews up to higher ground and making yellow, which most audiences see as a sun, happens to coincide with yellow in spiral dynamics as something that just worked out in a beautiful, sort of almost unintentional way when this was first being created as a body of content. And so then what we say is, what we need to recognize is that people think this is idealistic. They think that, Rand, what you're trying to bring everyone with you. What about the bad actors? And what we say is, don't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, and don't conflate the shadow behaviors of all three of these worldviews with the human beings. We want to imagine a circle of compassion, a circle of inclusion, and we want to imagine at higher ground that no one is standing outside that circle. So we want to be inclusive of the human beings, but we do not want to be inclusive of the pathological behaviors. And there are a number of behaviors that are happening right now that we do not want to tolerate. We want to be intolerant of the pathology, but we don't want to throw out the human being. And the example I give when people want an illustration, I say, imagine when Pope John Paul was shot, and we may all remember that experience of watching him almost be killed. After he healed, he went in and visited with the prisoner who had been captured, his would-be assassin. And I want you guys to imagine, you might remember in Life magazine, the cover of Life magazine, when the Pope was sitting in the corner with no shackles on the would-be assassin, holding his hands, forgiving him. And so after he forgave his assassin and he went outside of the jail, the Pope did not say to the jailers, now that I've forgiven him, you need to let him out of prison. He said, I have forgiven him as a child of God, but he needs to stay in prison. And that is an example of discernment. So we can be non-judgmental of the spirit, but we can still have discernment for the consequences of the behavior and for the potential risk that he poses to himself or to society if he weren't in prison. So this move from the lower level to the higher level is really a move out of being judgmental and still maintaining our discernment with boundaries as we move to higher ground, which can be a very fierce place. People think, yes, the Rumi quote, which is beautiful and inspiring, there's a field, right? There's a field at higher ground. And beyond right doing, beyond wrongdoing, there is this field. I'll meet you there. That there's a lot of beautiful poetry about the idea of higher ground. And there's an and here. There needs to also be a fierceness and a responsibility of leaders at higher ground to actually make choices in service of the whole, in service of the system, to recognize that the system is held together, especially with very healthy blue. And when green wants to dismantle and completely eliminate blue, defund the police, pick your attack on blue from green, that actually is incredibly threatening to the stability for all of us and for all of this. And by the way, when orange wants to exploit what's going on with the economics of outrage, that's shadow, and orange is actually fueling our polarization because the amount of money that Facebook and social media companies are making off of the outrage. Oh, and let's not forget about blue, because blue has all sorts of intolerance that also need to be recognized. And so this move here is a move to recognizing that in many ways, we have always had a rich diversity in America. And this is the last slide. And most of you know our motto as a country, e pluribus unum, out of many one. Out of the diversity, there is a unity. Out of this incredible complexity, there is a diversity. So there is a tremendous wisdom that exists at the base, at the foundation of the United States that we actually are going, at Stagen, we're going back to renew ourselves, to revitalize and to reconnect. And so that's a little peek into some content. And this isn't being delivered to academics. This is being delivered to pedestrians, to people who are struggling day in and day out. And our one prescription, when people say, what can I do? What can I do? And what can I do that's actionable? And my answer is break bread with people who you would normally never break bread with. Go and have a dinner, go drink some wine and sit for 3 hours with people who are on the other side of the aisle from you and actually see that you have much more in common than you might imagine. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get more and more, not just of our clients, but anyone that we touch, to start getting into dialogue and start getting into discussion with a greater diversity. And I'll tell you, I mean, I am in the green world all the time. I'm in the orange world every day. I'm in the blue world all the time, from being at dinner with people in Alabama and places like that on a regular basis, to being in Boulder, to being in Seattle with progressives. And so as I learn to navigate these different territories, what I find is people are very open, but they have to actually be met where they are. And it's a long road ahead. This is, someone said to me recently, don't worry, Rand, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. Things are probably in the next decade going to get, maybe next 2 decades, going to get much worse, which is why we need more people stepping into responsibility to be a part of the solution. And this is really hard work. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, unfortunately, the DEI community is not positioned, in my opinion, just to be provocative, they are not positioned to be helpful. I talk to CEOs and board members every day. Big companies that are my friends, that I don't work with as clients, that run Fortune 1000 companies, I'm talking to them all the time. They are not, the CEOs and the boards are not doing the work that's necessary to create a more inclusive organization, an organization with healthier forms of belonging. They aren't doing it because they're outsourcing it to the DEI experts. And you can't outsource this. You can outsource a lot of stuff, but not adaptive change. And until the DEI community actually gets the executive team, the CEO, and the board to start to walk the talk on this, it's going to be a bunch of bullshit and a big charade is what it's going to be. And guess what? What camp is the DEI community in? And we all know the answer, the green camp. It's the progressive camp. I love the progressive camp. I love the light of progressivism. And I also love the light of traditionalism. And I also love the light of the Achiever Worldview. And people will say to me, Rand, this comes from Bert, Rand, are you a conservative? And my answer is, not merely. Well, Rand, that's confusing. Are you a progressive? Not merely, at least, but not merely, because I actually identify with the healthy expressions of all three of these worldviews. But the DEI community, the practitioners, the consultants, they're so well-intentioned. They are coming from a green place, and I talk to these people also. Some of them are friends, and they say to me, I cannot, out of my own consciousness, I just cannot work with people who are going to vote for Donald Trump. Okay. So you're going to exclude half the country. So you're going to stand for healing America with half the country, and the other half the country of the deplorables, we're just going to leave them out. So how are we supposed to move forward? We will only move forward when we have, dare I say, an integral approach to diversity and inclusion. We'll have to drop the E, because the E is equity, and equity has become a part of the culture war, and it has been it's no longer effective. It has to be gone, because the far right and the right have said equity equals equality of outcomes and socialism. So we can't be asking the right of America to be stepping into equity when that word has already been defined and there's no going back. But we can save diversity and inclusion for sure. And we need diversity and inclusion. But we also have to recognize that the E of equity is radioactive now. So let's rumble, people. Charlie's here. Let's do it. Let's get into some Q&A, and let's get juicy and provocative, and let's challenge each other, and let's actually do what a classical liberal group would want to do. Let's offer up respectfully points of view that actually are challenging to each other. so that we're not all just saying the same thing. So Mary, you're up first, and then we're going to go to Michael and then Trudy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Rand, thank you. This is a very validating, brilliant introduction and context setting you've given us. I am personally continuously tortured by this idea that we have to choose sides, jump into a bucket, jump into a very lean and shallow definition of sides, by the way. So it's like nobody wants to deal with the complexity, the deep, rich, multi-layered facets of these kind of situations, conditions, states of mind, mindsets, etc. And dealing with nuance. It's like I don't think most people in our society even contemplate that we are skimming on the top of the surface as we default and follow the mobs and the voices in the media. We lack the ability to absorb and discuss the layers, the nuance, and the complexity of what's really going on. And I continuously hear this term discernment being so important. I completely agree with it. What struck me as you were talking is that most people have no idea what it means to have discernment, and that what's lacking is some sort of instruction, awareness piece, broadly and scalably available to people about what we mean when we talk about discernment and nuance. And the last thing I'll say is the Rumi quote, which again, Rumi, that Rumi quote and all Rumi poetry is being spread widely. But do people really understand? They feel intuitively a sense of that quote that you out beyond the all ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a space. I will meet you there.
Yep.
And you can feel the essence of that because it's pure. But do they know what that means on a deeper level? And do they know how to create the conditions that will allow them to play in that space? I think that's a big missing piece for a lot of people.
Well, you hit a lot, and I want to appreciate several things that you just shared and offer up a couple of responses. So at the highest level, complexity has a PR problem. You guys get that? Okay, like complexity has a PR problem because nuance and the capacity to actually have the kind of discernment that Mary's talking about requires development. So development in developing our capacity to have a more nuanced and complex way of relating with the world is a really long and hard journey. And we work with clients for private businesses where we work with the owners of the businesses for not just a year or 2 years or 3 years. We have many, many, many clients that we've worked with for 10, 15, 20 years continuously. And so we know that development is hard and it takes a long time. But the problem is that I just got an email from a DEI consultant in New York, and the headline was 90 minutes to increasing trust in the context of diversity and inclusion. Because what's happening is the corporations are demanding these sprints. You got to go faster. You got to teach people quicker. And it's, once again, I'm sorry, but it's just bullshit. It's a charade, and people are pretending that they're actually doing development when they're not doing much more than provoking some new ideas and entertaining people. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to the movies and being entertained, but let's not hold that out as development. How many of you remember James Carville in the Democratic, in the Clinton era? He said, it's the economy, stupid. Raise your physical hands if you remember that. Okay, a lot of people remember that. It's the economy, stupid. Here's what we have to say about the polarization in America, the race topic just being one of them. It's development, stupid. Like that's it. It's development. We don't have an appetite to actually do the work. And so we are Stagen, we are very unpopular with public companies because we have which is wonderful. And I'm so thankful for my team and my clients and over decades of doing this work. We have a very strong reputation in corporate America, in the pockets that we have a presence. And we have to turn away opportunities every week because we will not work with an organization if their CEO is not doing his or her own work. And that's why I say probably a couple more decades of it's going to get worse because there's just the appetite to do what Mary's pointing to is really, really rare. All right, Michael, and then Trudy. Michael Abramson.
Hi, Rand. I like very much all that you presented, and it resonates with my understanding of this. But my question to you is that my impression that your academy, you mostly focus on business world, on corporate world.
Correct.
But a lot of controversies around this DEI, they are coming from universities, they are coming from the government. So are you trying to do something with them? And what is generally your take on this? What is going on at universities?
Well,
and also in the media, which in theory they should be like objective, unbiased, but in practice it's very rare. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about this.
Well, I mean, I think for those of us that are students of integral theory, what's playing out in universities is exactly what we would expect is playing out. I think Ken Wilber talked about this as the mean green meme 20 years ago, and it's just coming on full force. So much of this is what we would expect would be happening as more and more of a progressive worldview is coming online, as expressed especially in a younger generation, in which they're being indoctrinated into an academic world, the academy, where especially in the liberal arts side of the academy, where there is a bias to a progressive worldview. And we all know the statistics on this, that at 90% or more of faculty within our universities across the entire country, sometimes it's 95, 98%, identify as being on the left politically. So we don't actually have a good balance in our own faculty. And so then what would we expect happens to the students? And so I think, that question of what is going on at universities, I might give Steve a chance when he talks here in a moment to speak to that. I want to really talk about our direct experience. And yes, we work mostly with business leaders. We do work with leaders of institutions, nonprofits. We have had chancellors of universities go through our programs. We have had many leaders of large religious organizations, mega churches, a variety of different denominations, priests, bishops. We have had Catholic bishops, Episcopal bishops that have large regions. So we work where the leaders are and where the appetite is to make a difference. But we do have a bias of working with the money, the power, because the way that we're going to change universities, one way we're going to change universities is by getting pressure from the alumni who are going to make demands of what is going to need to be changed if they're going to continue to make donations. And so Stagen, we've just picked one part, which is where capital is, where the money is. But there's a lot of important work that's going on in all parts of the system. So Trudy, and then I'd love you guys to also try to integrate in a little bit what other people are asking. Hey, I appreciated that, and I want to integrate that into what I'm saying, so it gets a little bit more dialogue-y, which is hard, but we can try. So Trudy, you're up.
Yeah, actually, you kind of answered a lot of my question already. I was going to ask how well is this received in the organizations that you have taught it, and what's the result when you're following up with them? Are they using these principles? Has it changed their organization in some way? Have they found better ways of working together? So if address that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah. So I don't want to make this about any one topic. Diversity and inclusion is a topic. Climate change is a topic. What we find, Trudy, is when we work with a CEO of an organization or a leader of an organization, could be a nonprofit, and that leader spends a year working on herself. And as a result of working on herself, more self-awareness, a capacity to recognize the wake that is behind all of her decisions. We help our leaders realize that when we make a choice, that choice is consequential. I was talking to a leader a few days ago who runs an organization in Georgia, a relatively large family business, thousands of employees, and we were talking about what he had just communicated to his executive team and to the top, let's say, 100 leaders in his business. He had sent an email, and he realized in the conversation with me that the email was unnecessarily critical and harsh in its tone, and that he likely got the short-term result that he wanted at the expense of long-term undermining of trust within the top tier of his organization. And so what we're trying to do with leaders is to help them realize, as we become more aware, we can actually choose differently. Because with awareness and choice comes a responsibility to recognize that every decision, especially when you're higher up in organizational life, the consequences of those decisions ripple out like the wake of a boat. And what's so cool about development and consciousness complexity is that as a leader becomes better at that current level, that's skill development, knowledge acquisition, it increases the likelihood that they can actually go vertical in their own vertical, the elevated development. However, when they move up, they're going to relate with relationships in a more complex, nuanced ways, which means they're going to relate with the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a more nuanced way. And so we don't have to be DEI consultants or trainers. We just have to continue to focus on human development, because as a human develops to higher levels, that person is going to relate with and make decisions across a broad spectrum of topics that are going to be informed from a more complex operating system. And so that's the work. It's development. It's development. How long is this going to take? Generations. Rand, that's not very inspiring. Well, it's going to take generations. It's going to take people thinking not in years anymore. We can't have our leaders continuing to be in this pathological short-termism of America, that everything is now. And what we realize is leaders have to start to recognize what is the progress that we can make in 10-year increments. Our clients love the Bill Gates quote, and Bill Gates said, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can get done in 10 years. And so we say to our clients, how might you be underestimating yourself? What could you do if you started expanding your sense of time and started looking at the progress and look at the long arc of progress? And yes, there's suffering going on in the world, but relative to 100 years ago and 200 years ago, there's a lot less suffering. So let's put that into context and perspective. And when we get leaders who are able to just peek into more of an integral view, they're able to hold that. But when they're in the lower levels, and as we all know, even though I've talked about the great diversity between the traditionalists, the achievers, and the progressives, the one thing all three of those worldviews have in common, as integral theory teaches us, is they think their worldview is the right worldview, right? I mean, Steve knows that. We all know this. This is like all three of these worldviews think their worldview is the right worldview. That's their commonality among all the other diversity. And so this is just more just more reason that we've got to have more of a commitment to higher and more elevated development. Barbara Brown, take yourself off mute. What do you got?
You mentioned working in flyover country, where I live too, and not so much on the coast. Is there do you think a developmental reason or a sociological reason why this works better in Middle America than it does on the coast? Just out of curiosity.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. So it's counterintuitive to a lot of people, especially integral students. What we have found, we've been at this for decades. What we have found is that when we meet a leader from Kansas City, Kansas, who may have grown up there, gone to school somewhere else, and then come back home to raise their family. And these are people who might have gone to universities on the coast. They might have gone to a Harvard, or they might have gone to a UCLA, but they go back home. And they feel a sense of community with Kansas. And then we show up and we say, we want to work with you through many decades to actually become a more conscious leader, conscious development, so that we can help you be of service to your stakeholders, to your customers, to your employees, and to your community. Our clients have almost an inherent blue, access to healthy blue traditionalism that has them deeply connecting to stakeholder theory and to stakeholder management and to the principles of conscious capitalism. And this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but when we meet people in New York and people in, especially in San Francisco, and we ask them what their relationship is with the community, it's almost, there's no geographic, they're not tethered. There's this orange opportunistic, I want to get mine, I want to grow my company. And then we talk about time horizon. And we say, what's your time horizon? And so much of what's happening on the coast is about I want to get rich in 5 to 7 years. We don't work with private equity. We don't, none of the short-term capital works with our model. And so that would be my answer, is that there's this healthy community orientation. And it just seems like, why do you call it stakeholder theory? It just seems like that's the right thing to do. You take care of your employees and your employees will take care of you. You take care of your customers and your customers will stay loyal. You take care of your vendors and make sure that they can make enough money, even though you have to negotiate, but you don't want to, squeeze them so hard that they can't continue to supply you, because then that hurts you long-term. These things that seem so sophisticated in their language, the heartland often says that just seems like the right way to do business, if that makes sense to you guys. This is just, once again, our experience. Okay, David.
The other thing I see there, Rand, is less contempt for the working class. I mean, I was on a call a couple of weeks ago where somebody said, in all seriousness, how do we stop working class folks from voting because they are so ignorant they can't make good political decisions? And I mean, I'm just, OMG, right? I don't even know what to say to that. And even when people disagree, they're still in a lot of that heartland, there's that sense of civility that's required, and there's the sense that you just don't treat people badly. And I hate to say it about a lot of the progressive left, but they'll treat anybody badly if they don't agree with them, and that's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, and Barbara, I want to share something, and then let David come in. That Steve really worked with me and really helped me, along with Bert and Jeff, because we had several years during the pandemic that we were supporting each other on Zoom, and we were sort of locked in our houses. And what I used to assume is that I held the spiral in my mind, and I was like, we have to see individuals in our country go to green so they can go to yellow, so they can go to integral. And what Steve helped me to realize is because there is so much progressive pluralistic green at a societal and Wilber's quadrants lower left space in the culture of America, because we have been shaped and we have been exposed to so much of those memes, those value systems, that people who are at an individual level, their interior structure being more orange blue, or maybe even blue orange, if you think primary and secondary, that they have enough exposure to the green to be able to actually make a move up to integral. And so we're actually saying, that the assumption that I had for years was the only people we can work with are people who are already progressive who want to go post-progressive. And that's not our experience. Now our experience is we're working with heartland achievers who are Christians, who have strong faith, and they're reading Ken Wilber, and they're like, we're going to build an integral company, because they also have a multicultural sensibility, because they also are able to feel into the healthy parts of green to enough of a degree, but they don't want to live there. They don't want to go there. They want to appreciate the parts that are healthy for them, and they want to keep their faith if they're faith-based. And not all of our clients are faith-based, but many of them are. And they also want to be able to maintain their healthy orange, their healthy achievement. And so we're in an experiment of moving people up the spiral towards yellow, towards an integrated view, even though it doesn't look like a typical, progressive that's ready to pop to yellow. So David, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Rand. This is so stimulating. So my own sense as kind of an outsider to the business world is that a lot of the DEI stuff is people using green language, but coming from a sort of blue absolutistic altitude where, we have the truth, almost authoritarian.
Yep.
So I'm curious to hear, in your experience, what percentage of it is that, if that's right? And then how do you work with leaders to try and make fine-grained distinctions so that they're not sort of dismissing all of progressivism as just this, just this sort of absolutistic, because from an orange perspective, they'd be correctly seeing that as, regressive and sort of a drag. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how you help leaders think through the dynamics, the complicated dynamics between these different worldviews.
Well, I mean, there's no easy answer for that. The first thing we do is just help leaders to recognize that these worldviews exist, because so many of our clients have never really thought about this. They make these assumptions that, everybody's making meaning the way I'm making meaning. And so by just starting with the fact that there are distinctions, our clients are like, smoke comes out their ears. And then to bring in the light and shadow. Oh, so I don't have to conflate the shadow with the person, or the shadow of everyone in that worldview, that everybody is like the shadow, because they're not. And we get them to take responsibility that there's a shadow where they stand. And we have them do a self-assessment of, where is the shadow of my own worldview? And so David, what that does is that's destabilizing enough just to start to get them to start grokking into a more nuanced and complex set of questions. And we often are, and I'll use a rubber band here. Our clients and the leaders we work with are problem solvers. So when they experience tension, their assumption is that's a problem to be solved. I got to solve that. One of the ways that you actually get rid of tension is the denial or the avoiding of the conflict. And so we work with our clients to build a new relationship with tension, where they can actually be in a creative tension. And we help them understand that, yes, there's destructive tension. If I pull too hard on this, the rubber band would break. But if I bring enough tension where I have energy, there's energy for transformation and change. That the generative process of development requires energy. And we help our clients to realize maybe I need to build a new relationship with tension itself. And maybe when I'm in the presence, like I will reveal, a couple weeks ago, I gave a speech. It was a higher ground speech, very similar to the slides you just saw. It got a standing ovation, which my ego loved, okay? And I'm still in my own work. The reason I know how far I have to go is that when I get a standing ovation, I actually get a hit of like, oh, validation. And when people are not that enthusiastic after my speech, I actually feel like I want validation. So I know I'm still far from, being high up on the developmental progression, because I get these clues. And but my assumption was the speech was well received. Two women came up to me after the speech, because I asked for feedback. I said, if you have feedback, please come find me. I'd love feedback, and especially feedback that is critical of my presentation. And these were two Black women who were so courageous and they were so passionate. And they came to me and they gave me exactly what I asked for. And they helped me to realize that they told me they did not like my speech. They told me they were offended by my speech. They would not introduce themselves by name. And it was a conference with name badges. And the one woman who was speaking on behalf of the two of them took her badge off before she came over to speak to me. When I put my hand out and introduced myself, she wouldn't introduce herself and wouldn't shake my hand. And they came at me hard, guys. When I say hard, hard. It was aggressive. And this is what I felt. And what I wanted to do was walk away, okay? Because I felt like it was inappropriate how aggressive they were coming. But I stayed in it. And I took a big deep breath. And they kept coming, and I said to them, the feedback you're giving me right now is really hard. I'm really struggling. I'm super confused, and I want you to keep coming. Don't stop. And and they just kept coming. And the more they came at me, the more I surrendered and stayed in this tension and just said to myself, oh, this is me at my growth edge. This is me actually needing to learn and grow. And I actually got so like relaxed, almost like the idea of surrendering to win, that they calmed down. And the softer I got, the softer they got. It was like a 10-minute conversation. And then I said, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And what they were really upset by is I told a story on that speech about when George Floyd was murdered, about how disorienting it was for me. And I talked about the Tom Peters idea that if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. And I said, I was so confused. And I went to my neighbors, and I was outside a couple of days after George Floyd was killed. And they said to me, Rand, you don't look good. And I was like, I wasn't sleeping. I was crying. I was super disoriented. And I said, guys, I'm not good. Like, what do you mean? What's wrong with me? Like, aren't you paying attention? Like George Floyd? And they're like, George who? Because look, I live in a neighborhood with a bunch of rich white guys, and they weren't paying attention. And I was paying attention. And because I was paying attention, I was confused, and they weren't confused. So these women said to me, it took me 4 years. I got this feedback 2 weeks ago. They said they were offended that I would suggest that anyone would be confused by that, because if you grew up the way they grew up, it wasn't confusing at all to them. And so now I actually am more sensitive to the fact that when I'm in front of a group of people and I tell that story, I don't want to tell that story without also recognizing that other people from a different life, different color skin, were not confused by that. But the fact that I didn't have that nuance really upset them. And I'm very grateful that I got that feedback. But guys, and at the end of the 10 minutes, the woman put her hand out and she introduced herself by name. And so that was my feedback, that this worked. A part of me wanted to like attack them, okay? A part of me wanted to fight. Another part of me wanted to run away, because I could have easily said, hey guys, I don't need this, and walked away. But this is what we're trying to teach our clients how to do. How do you stay in the heat? This is really hard work. And most people don't want to do this hard work. they want to outsource this to their diversity consultant. And they're looking at their consultant, and the consultant needs to be saying to their client, you're not going to get stronger watching me do push-ups. Like, you can outsource almost everything if you're successful and you're powerful, but you can't outsource your own development. And this is what we need people to do, is to step into their own work. I don't know, David, if that's helping at all, but
the story was all you needed. That was great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. John Dupuy? Oh,
Dupuy.
Dupuy.
Dupuy, right.
Dupuy.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to thank you for this and such a healthy, powerful expression of our integral thing that you're doing. It's really great. And I almost want to pass because I don't know if how this directly applies to the work you're doing, but I would value your opinion on seeking a higher ground and how this affects the companies and the populations that you're working with. And for the last 25 years, I noted a long time ago that if there wasn't some way to absorb not the immigration, but the migration. In other words, millions of people crossing borders of different languages, different cultures, different developmental levels. It would lead to the rise of the reactionary right, neo-fascism,
yep,
and be a great threat to liberal democracies, which we see in Hungary, we see in Sweden, we see in our country. Russia's weaponizing immigration with Finland. I mean, Brexit, without that, it probably wouldn't have happened. And so, and there's different perspectives from each of these levels, the progressive, traditionalists, and achievers. And, there's definite problems and there's definite good things. Like we get this dynamic workforce, and millions of people are willing to work hard for, less than we'd have to pay in America. I mean, there's good stuff. And I've worked with a lot of them. They're very hardworking and have a lot of integrity for the most part. And then again, there's bad people, as Donald, likes to tell us all the time. But have you seen that pressure asserting itself in the work that you do? And have you been able to work with these different perspectives that each of these different levels bring and find a higher level of an integral thing that could really help us successfully deal with this given fact of the mass migrations all over the world of people and threatening different cultures and different developmental levels? Is there any light in your work in that particular?
I'm smiling because I look at the time. We got 8 minutes left. I'm gonna. You said you were gonna pass. I'm gonna pass on trying to try to even answer a really important, beautiful, complex question. And I'll give a couple of sort of like just wonderings for myself. I wonder what the consequences are of embracing so much immigration and so much diversity that we lose a shared center. And if we don't have a center in which we are able to subordinate ourselves to, which was, at least when I was growing up, the one thing I felt Americans shared in common, especially during the Cold War, was a patriotism, that we were Americans. Yes, I'm a Texan and someone else is from California and someone else from New York, but we're Americans. And if we continue to see the loss of the center because of this demand for multiculturalism, and this is counterintuitive again, the multiculturalism that can exist in such a healthy way at the periphery of a society can only exist if there's a strong center. And this is why blue is so important going forward. We must renew and reconnect to what created at a classical liberal Western values, Judeo-Christian values, what created the United States and what created so many European countries was these foundations that civilizations are losing touch with. And so the question is, instead of trying to dismantle, how do we renew and revitalize? I'm going to hand it off to Steve here, which is a great segue, because I believe, and this is crazy that I say this, but hey, I get to say this. And if clients don't want to work with us, I don't care, because we don't work with big public companies that have to deal with all the politics and all the pressure from social media. We work with people who are business owners. And we're like, if you don't want to work with us, don't work with us. But this is spiritual work. We are unapologetic. The work of higher ground is spiritual work. And we can define spirituality as having a recognition that I am a part of something bigger than myself. And I can be an atheist and still be spiritual because I feel connected to the cosmos, because I feel connected to nature. But we've got to start to recognize that this is not an intellectual journey. It is a journey that requires a spiritual orientation. And Steve, give us a few little nuggets of wisdom.
Well, let me just say amen to what you just said.
Yeah, me too.
Regarding
Thank
the
you,
spiritual
Rand.
work. Yeah.
Really, really helpful. Appreciate it.
So just a comment and then a quick question. The comment is, I just want everybody to really appreciate how important it is and what an excellent job Rand and his organization have done at simplifying this, right? Because it's complex, but in the course of simplifying it, it's been like a learning lab for the theory. I mean, the theory has been improved. I mean, so for example, Rand's got their Achiever instead of modernism, right? I go, well, you got to call it modernity. That's what it is. And he tried it out in his.
I tried it.
And they just like were deers in the headlight when you mentioned that term, right? So I appreciate that. Achiever for the audiences that you're speaking to is actually much more digestible, and I think that the simplicity of it is really it's illuminated the way I understand there. You sort of came to that together. You mentioned it. That is the simplest truth is, what does development mean, right? Everybody, you made it clear that development is this higher ground and that everybody should naturally want to aspire to that. And what does that mean? It simply means expanding the scope of what you can value. I mean, there's more to it than that, but in the spirit of let's get down to the brass tacks and say it as succinctly and as simply as we can, that's what you're offering in this excellent presentation is a way of people thinking about what it could mean practically to increase the scope of their value by valuing the light, of all of these cultural structures. So that we've learned some things from your on the ground, development of all this. The question
we're the arena, as I tell Steve. I said, Steve, I get with Steve. I say, give me some stuff. And he's like, well, here's some stuff. Here's a book. Here's an article. And I go into the arena with my team, and we'll work with 3,000 leaders this year in programs that are 15 weeks to 52 weeks. I mean, this is deep work with people, and we'll just get beat up. And we'll be like, that didn't work. That didn't work. That didn't work. This worked. Let's keep doing that. And this is how we iterate, rapid prototyping. And so, Steve, I know we only got 3 minutes, but if you have a question, I'll do my best to probably.
Okay, well, just the simple question is, when you mentioned our Zoom conversations that we started to have like in April of 2020, right when the pandemic had hit. And at the time, it was actually before George Floyd's death. And then immediately afterwards, like in the 6 months between, July and the end of 2020, diversity, equity, inclusion within the business community had become like a de rigueur thing. It's like if you didn't have an accounting department, right? You have to have a DEI bureaucracy, or you're not, you're a poor business person. Yep. And of course, we've been the gamut. We've seen it. We see the backlash that is occurring now. And I'm just wondering whether you see it having a long curve, or whether it's going to transform into something that's less green, or where do you see the future of DEI from what you've gleaned from your business travels?
I am not optimistic, which is very disappointing. I feel like the pendulum is swinging and continues to swing. I talked to 3 leaders in the last week that are shutting down their DEI initiatives. I talked to a DEI consultant who's changing his business offering because the demand for his consulting services is diminishing so fast that he's now reinventing himself and doing other kind of consulting. I think we're going to see a continued rapid decline of DEI, and I think we're going to see an emergence of something that will be more. This is the irony, more inclusive. I went to I'll end with this. I went and gave a speech in October to a group, and I put up a big tent, and I said, we need to have a big tent. And then I said, we need a tent, a community that includes black and white, male and female, LGBTQ ally, LGBTQ critic. We need people who are fossil fuel executives and people who are environmental activists in the same room. And then I said to them, and they were really freaked out, I said, you are in a room, because I knew the room pretty well. It was about 300 people, 300 CEOs. I said, you are in a room right now with half the people in this room are going to, given the opportunity, are going to vote for Donald Trump. And half the people in this room, given the opportunity, are going to vote for Biden. Look around. You're in the room with people who are way more diverse than you may realize from a diversity of viewpoint and thought. And I think, Steve, that we're going to have to tackle the complexity here. We've got to. Now, I don't think it's going to be under the banner of DEI. I think we're already seeing a shift to DNI, diversity and inclusion. DNI is what it's being called. And it's not with, I'm just noticing this, it's the E is just dropping off with certain more complex organizations are already leading the way on that. So I do predict that DNI will be the next iteration, and we'll see what happens. And I'm committed to being a part in some small way of the solution. I wish I could wave a magic wand and there just be the solution out there, but I have very little hope that the progressives are going to solve this. I think we're going to have to solve it by bringing the beauty of green and the progressive approach to diversity and the beauty of orange and the beauty of blue in the conversation. And so with that, it is 7:31. We're already 1 minute over. You're going to get the slides. You're going to get, I'm going to put together, Nigel, I'm going to put together a little like care package. I'm going to include a video link to a Heineken commercial, which is going to blow your mind. It's 5 minutes and it's going to blow your mind. It's the best media I have seen on higher ground and of the humanity of coming together. It's so good. Watch that video. It's on YouTube, so it's a YouTube link. I'm going to put in the follow-up. I'll give you my slides, and I will include a couple of links. Nigel, I'll get this done before midnight tonight and send it to you. I'll curate a couple of other things that people who are got their curiosity piqued. Some additional, one other video from Rebel Wisdom that took me 2 years to find this 45-minute interview with a woman who I actually think from London has an incredible point of view on diversity, and another link to a video, it's 11 minutes, of a headmistress in London who's maybe the best example of how conservative values can create a rich, multicultural, diverse community at a school that she runs. And it's mind-boggling what she's doing with Christian, lower C conservative values, creating the conditions for a thriving diversity, which doesn't seem like those two go together. And you guys enjoy your adventures and your journey. And I hope to come back as a attendee at another one of these and listen into the wonderful teachers and guests that you guys get to hear from regularly. And thank you again for the invitation, Steve, and everyone for being here.
Thank you, Rand.
Rand. Thank you,
Okay.
Rand.
Thanks, Rand.
Thanks, guys.